Yehiratzon, Parashat Ki Tisa 5779, the Limud Shebila Refuat Kol HaCholim, ובתוכם Tanya בת הודה מרגלית, יוסף יאיר בן אביב וחווה, הרב סיוון בן סימה, בתוך כל שאר חולי ישראל. ולעילוי נשמת חברי, מורי ורבי, איתן אליעזר ben Mordechai, זכר צדיק לברכה. A week ago, I got the news that one of my closest friends and someone who I really experienced a lot of life together with, Ethan Lax, passed away. So I just want to start the shir with a character trait that can be learned from Ethan. So one of the things that stood out to me was the idea of respecting parents. A couple of weeks ago, we got to go out to Roma, which is our coffee, learning place. And when we finished, like he just said, I'm really worried about my parents. Jonathan, passed away like a while ago, and it's really difficult. So he went to the cashier and bought out an entire lunch for his parents. So I think that idea of respecting parents really stood out for me with Ethan. And I hope Ezrat Hashem, as often as possible, to share different traits that I gained from my relationship and with Ethan. When we enter into Parsha Ki Tisa, we enter into the darkest moment of Jewish history. Am Yisrael were on the highest level. We spoke to Hashem, we received the Torah, and then immediately after, we shatter to the lowest level. We abandon the relationship. They compare it almost as if someone underneath their own chuppah just like leaves their own, wife. It's a terrible experience in Am Yisrael's history. And I think often the biggest question we have to ask is, how could it be that people fall so low? And I think that if we look at the structure of the Torah, it will give us a little bit of an insight in how to deal with this question of how can such great moments become so low so fast. And so when we look at the structure immediately before Chet HaEgel, if you look in the Torah in Perek Lamed Aleph Pasuk Yud Bet, we hear about Shabbat, and immediately after we hear about Shabbat, we start the story of Chet HaEgel. But immediately after in Perek Lamed Hey Pasuk Aleph again, we hear about Shabbat. So the story of Chet HaEgel is wrapped with the concept of Shabbat. And the obvious question is, this structure is teaching us that we have to understand Shabbat in order to understand Chet HaEgel. What is it about Shabbat that if we would have remembered Shabbat, it would have prevented the failure of Chet HaEgel? And so the Sfat Emet says in 4 words something incredible about Shabbat. In the year 1871, the Sfat Emet says, what's the idea of Shabbat and why does Shabbat surround the story of the Egel? He says, Inyan Shabbat hu aliyat hanivraim. In those words, the Sfat Emet defines that the idea of Shabbat is to recognize that there's a difference between the week and Shabbat. What happens during the week is we do everything that we need to do. We need to cook, so we cook, and we need to eat, so we eat, and we need to make fire, so we make fire. We're living a life of needs. Shabbat comes in and eliminates all the needs. And it says you are not allowed to do any more necessities. You're not allowed to cook, and you can't turn on lights, and you can't change anything. Whatever there is the way that it is. But what happens when you can't change things, when you don't have to need to do anything, is that suddenly you recognize the ability to ask yourself a new question. And the new question that Shabbat asks is not what do you need to do, but what do you want to do? The idea of Shabbat is to say to yourself, fine, you live a life of necessity, and you're going to work, and you're going to shul, and you're putting on tzitzit, and you're lighting Shabbat candles, you're doing all the necessities, but Shabbat comes and says, can you transition from a world of need to a world of want? And when we forget what we want, then we end up sinning in the Egel. What happens is that the Chet HaEgel was a result of Am Yisrael forgetting what they want to reach. They knew that they needed something, but they forgot what they wanted. And Shabbat surrounding the story of the Egel is saying that if you remember what you want, then when you need to do something, it's not anymore demanding of you, it's enabling you. That the obligations you have enable you. If I remember that I want to be with my family, then yes, it comes with obligation. But that obligation becomes a privilege. And if I remember that I feel that I care about the story of Am Yisrael, then that demand becomes a privilege because I know what I want. I want Am Yisrael to grow. And I want Am Yisrael's joy. And I want their happiness. And therefore my obligation is not going to cause me to make the sin of the Egel. Because we will all make a chet Egel. And we will all fail. Because if we make our relationship with Hashem a relationship of need, then what we're doing is ending up making an Egel. My bracha entering into Shabbat, that we're trying to learn and utilize and remember and live the memory of Ethan. It's very, very obvious to me that one of the things that stood out in his ability to create joy, to create dancing, to create honesty, to create being genuine, was that Ethan was very, very clear that I'm not willing to make Judaism into just a need. It stems from a want, from a dream, from a vision, and then what I need to do, I love to do. Shabbat Shalom.